The late afternoon sun, a molten gold orb sinking behind the jagged peaks of the Sierra Nevadas, cast long skeletal shadows across the rolling fields of my farm. Dust devils danced a lazy waltz in the dry air, kicked up by a gentle breeze that whispered secrets through the whispering wheat. It was a sight as familiar and comforting as my own reflection, the culmination of generations of sweat and toil etched into every furrow, every gnarled oak. My name is Elias Vance, and this land, stretching as far as the eye could see, has been in my family for over a century. It's more than just dirt and crops. It's the very marrow of my bones, the echoes of my ancestors in the rustling leaves. Today, however, the familiar peace of my domain felt off. A prickle of unease, like a fly buzzing too close to your ear, had been with me since the black sedan. An alien intruder on the rutted dirt track leading to my homestead had rumbled to a halt by my weathered barn. Two men, dressed in crisp, dark suits that seemed to mock the sun-baked earth, had emerged, their expressions as unyielding as granite. They introduced themselves as surveyors, representing the county, here to assess the potential for public access. Public access. The words themselves felt like a foreign blight. My farm, my sanctuary, a place where my grandfather had taught me to ride a horse, where my father had shown me the constellations on clear summer nights, a place where I'd buried my beloved dog, Buster, under the ancient apple tree. Public access? The thought was so absurd, so invasive, it took a moment to register. Public access to what, exactly? I'd asked, my voice tighter than I'd intended, my hands clenching instinctively around the worn leather reins of my prize mare, Clementine. She'd sensed my tension, her ears flicking back and forth, her breath coming in short, nervous puffs. The taller of the two men, a sharp-featured individual with eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw, produced a sheaf of papers. To the river, Mr. Vance. Specifically, the stretch of the Willow Creek that borders your property. We're exploring options for a public recreational trail. My heart sank, a heavy stone in my chest. Willow Creek. It was the lifeblood of my farm, a ribbon of cool, clear water that sustained my crops and provided a haven for wildlife. It was also, and had always been, my creek. My family had dammed it, diverted it, fished it, and bathed in it for generations. The idea of strangers trampling through, their laughter and litter polluting its serene beauty, was anathema. A public trail? I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. I don't think that's possible. This is private land. The second surveyor, a younger man with a perpetually bewildered expression, shifted his weight. Legally, Mr. Vance, there are often easements or riparian rights that allow for public access to navigable waterways. We're simply conducting an initial survey to determine the feasibility. An easement. Riparian rights. These were words I'd heard before, the jargon of lawyers and bureaucrats, but never applied to my land. My land was defined by the sweat of my brow, the sweat of my father's brow, the sweat of my grandfather's brow. It was defined by the sun, the rain, and the enduring spirit of this place. It wasn't defined by some arbitrary legal document that a bunch of men in suits held. My grandfather, I said, my voice gaining a hard edge, bought this land fair and square, every inch of it. There are no easements, no public rights. This creek is ours. The tall surveyor offered a thin, unconvincing smile. We understand your concern, Mr. Vance, but our job is to follow the law and explore all possibilities. We'll need to conduct our survey, mark out potential routes, and take some measurements. We'll be back tomorrow. He didn't wait for my reply. He and his companion climbed back into the black sedan, its tires spitting gravel as they sped away. leaving behind a cloud of dust and a knot of dread in my stomach. I watched them go, my jaw clenched. The sun, now a fiery ember, painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful spectacle that did little to soothe my frayed nerves. I dismounted Clementine, burying my face in her warm neck, inhaling the comforting scent of horse and hay. "What do you think, girl?" I murmured. "Think those fellas know what they're messing with?" Clementine nudged me gently with her velvety nose, as if offering silent reassurance. But even she couldn't dispel the gnawing fear that was starting to take root. This wasn't just about a trail. It was about the sanctity of my heritage, the legacy I was entrusted with. And these men, with their official papers and their detached pronouncements, were threatening to shatter it. The next morning, the sun rose, but it brought no warmth to my anxious heart. The surveyors returned, this time with their equipment, measuring tapes, stakes, and what looked like sophisticated electronic devices. They were polite, almost unnervingly so, as they began their work, their footsteps crunching on the dry grass, their voices a low murmur as they discussed their findings. I watched them from a distance, my rifle leaning against the porch railing, a silent, impotent sentinel. I knew I couldn't confront them physically. That would only escalate things, make me look like a hot-headed farmer. But every stake they drove into the ground felt like a violation, a physical manifestation of their intrusion. They spent the entire day meticulously charting the course of the creek, their progress a slow, agonizing march across my land. I saw them pause at the old, moss-covered stone bridge that my grandfather had built, a testament to his ingenuity and sheer determination. I saw them examine the small, secluded pool where I'd learned to swim, its crystal-clear water reflecting the dappled sunlight. Each landmark they scrutinized felt like a personal affront. As the day wore on, my anger began to curdle into a cold, hard resolve. I wouldn't let them do this. I couldn't. This land was more than just property. It was a living, breathing entity, imbued with the memories and spirit of my family. It was my birthright, and I would fight for it. That evening, after the surveyors had departed, leaving behind a trail of freshly disturbed earth, I found myself in my father's study, a room that had remained largely untouched since his passing. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and pipe tobacco. I ran my hand over the worn leather of his armchair, the same chair where he'd sat, a twinkle in his eye, telling me stories of our family's history. I knew, deep down, that my grandfather, Silas Vance, had been a man of foresight and resilience. He'd carved this farm out of the wilderness, facing down hardship and skepticism with an unshakable belief in his vision. He'd left a legacy, not just in the land itself, but in the documents that proved his claim. My gaze fell upon a heavy oak filing cabinet in the corner, a relic from a bygone era. It was where my father kept all the important family papers. I'd never really delved into it, content to trust that he'd managed everything. But now, with the specter of public access looming, I felt a desperate urge to find something, anything, that would protect my land. With a creak of protesting hinges, I pulled open the top drawer. It was filled with old tax receipts, faded photographs, and a jumble of brittle documents. I sifted through them, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Then my fingers brushed against something thick and substantial, bound with a faded ribbon. I pulled it out. It was a large, leather-bound folder, its cover embossed with an ornate, almost archaic design. The leather was cracked and worn, but the gold lettering, though faded, was still legible. Silas Vance, Land Grant, 1892. My breath hitched. 1892. My grandfather. This was it. This was the proof. My hands trembled as I untied the ribbon. The pages within were yellowed and fragile, covered in elegant, spidery script. There were deeds, surveys, and a multitude of official-looking seals. And then, there it was, the original land grant, issued to Silas Vance by the United States government, officially declaring him the owner of this vast tract of land, stretching from the base of the mountains to the meandering bend of Willow Creek. As I read the preamble, the words seemed to leap off the page, resonating with a power I hadn't anticipated. It spoke of homesteading, of taming the wild, of establishing a life and a legacy on virgin soil. It was a document of ownership, absolute and unequivocal. It didn't mention easements or public access or any of the modern legal entanglements that the surveyors had alluded to. It simply stated, in no uncertain terms, that this land belonged to Silas Vance and his heirs. A wave of profound relief, so potent it almost brought me to my knees, washed over me. The fear that had been a constant companion for the past 2 days began to recede, replaced by a surge of fierce pride and a renewed sense of purpose. My grandfather, in his wisdom, had protected me, protected us, across the chasm of a century. I carefully retied the ribbon, my fingers still a little shaky. I knew this document was my shield, my weapon. The surveyors might have their official papers, but they didn't have the history, the spirit, or the undeniable legal claim that was contained within this single, precious folder. The next morning, as the first rays of dawn painted the sky, I was waiting. The black sedan, predictable as the sunrise, pulled up to the barn. The 2 surveyors, looking expectant, emerged, their briefcases in hand. "Good morning, Mr. Vance," the tall one began, that same thin smile on his lips. "Ready to show us the way to the creek?" I met his gaze, my own eyes steady and unwavering. "Actually," I said, my voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority, "I have something you might want to see first." I held up the leather-bound folder. The gold lettering, Silas Vance, Land Grant, 1892, glinted in the morning light. The surveyors exchanged a look. The taller one's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. Surprise, perhaps, or a dawning apprehension. "What is that?" the younger one asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. "That," I replied, stepping forward, the folder held firmly in my hand, "is the original land grant for this property, issued to my grandfather, Silas Vance, in 1892. It clearly outlines the boundaries of my land, and I can assure you, gentlemen, there are no provisions for public access anywhere on it." I opened the folder, revealing the aged document. The tall surveyor, his face now a mask of professional neutrality, stepped closer, his eyes scanning the faded script. The younger man, his initial curiosity now replaced by a furrowed brow, joined him. They stood there for a long moment, the only sounds the chirping of birds and the distant lowing of my cattle. The surveyors conferred in hushed tones, their earlier confidence seemingly evaporating with each passing second. I watched them, a quiet satisfaction settling within me. The dust devils still danced, the wheat still whispered, but the oppressive weight of dread had lifted. My land, my legacy, was safe. The fight, I suspected, was far from over, but now I had the undeniable truth on my side. The 1892 land grant was my inheritance, and I was ready to defend it. The morning air, usually a balm to my soul, felt charged with a nervous energy, a stark contrast to the familiar peace of my domain. Clementine, my prize mare, shifted beneath me, her ears flicking back and forth, sensing the tension that had settled over the farm like a shroud. The 2 surveyors, the tall, sharp-featured one, and his perpetually bewildered younger counterpart, stood near the weathered barn, their crisp, dark suits a jarring anomaly against the sun-baked earth and the vibrant green of the fields. They'd packed up their equipment the previous evening, their expressions a mixture of professional neutrality and something akin to dawning apprehension. I'd seen it in the tall one's eyes when I'd unfurled my grandfather's land grant, the ornate, almost archaic design of the document seeming to materialize from thin air, silencing their bureaucratic jargon. "As you can see," I'd said, my voice tighter than I'd intended, gesturing to the elegant, spidery script. "This land has been in my family since 1892. Silas Vance, my grandfather, purchased it outright. There are no easements, no provisions for public access, no riparian rights granted to anyone but the Vance family." The tall surveyor had squinted at the document, his lips pressed into a thin line. He'd picked it up with a hesitant, almost reluctant reverence, turning it over in his hand as if expecting it to crumble to dust. The younger one had simply stared, his brow furrowed in a look of perpetual bewilderment. This is an original?" the tall one had asked, his voice lacking its earlier conviction. "It is," I'd confirmed, my gaze unwavering. "And it's been carefully preserved. A testament to my grandfather's foresight. He carved this farm out of the wilderness, and he made damn sure it would stay in our family, whole and undivided." There had been a long, pregnant silence, broken only by the gentle breeze that whispered secrets through the tall grass and the distant lowing of my cattle. The surveyors had exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between them. The tall one had then carefully placed the land grant back into its worn leather folder, his movements slow and deliberate. "We'll need to review this with our superiors, Mr. Vance," he'd said, his tone now measured, stripped of its earlier dismissiveness. "There are procedures, of course." "Of course," I'd replied, a ghost of a smile touching my lips. "But I suspect those procedures will confirm what this document unequivocally states. This land is ours. Willow Creek is ours. The path to it, and from it, is ours." They had packed their gear with a newfound quietude. The tall surveyor had offered a curt nod, the younger one a mumbled, "Sir." They'd climbed into their black sedan, the vehicle's tires crunching on the dry grass as they pulled away, leaving behind only the lingering scent of exhaust fumes and a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the air. Now, watching them recede down the rutted dirt track, a profound sense of relief, so potent it almost brought me to my knees, washed over me. It was a relief tinged with the knowledge that this was likely not the end of the matter. Bureaucracies, I knew, were like stubborn weeds. You thought you'd pulled them out by the root, but they had a way of reappearing, their tendrils always seeking new purchase. Yet for today, the specter of public access looming over my farm had receded. Clementine nudged my hand with her soft muzzle, her breath warm against my skin. I stroked her neck, feeling the familiar, comforting rhythm of her breathing. "We did it, girl," I murmured, my voice rough with emotion. "We held them off." I rode her back towards the farmhouse, the familiar landscape unfolding before me with a renewed sense of preciousness. The rolling fields, the gnarled oak at the crest of the hill, the weathered barn that had stood for generations. Each element felt more vibrant, more vital than ever before. The sun, a molten gold orb, was beginning its slow descent, casting long skeletal shadows across the land. It was a sight I'd witnessed countless times, yet today it held a deeper meaning. It was a reminder of the enduring cycle of life, of the land's resilience, and of my own role as its steward. The next few days passed in a state of watchful calm. I continued my chores, tending to the crops, checking on the livestock, the rhythm of the farm a steady counterpoint to the simmering anxiety that still lay coiled in my gut. I kept the land grant in my father's study, not locked away, but displayed prominently on his desk. A constant, tangible reminder of what I was fighting for. I'd found it tucked away in a heavy oak filing cabinet, a relic from a bygone era, nestled within a worn leather-bound folder, its gold lettering, though faded, still legible. The document itself was a marvel of its time, printed on thick yellowed paper, adorned with seals and signatures that spoke of a formal, yet deeply personal, transfer of ownership. It was more than just a piece of paper. It was the lifeblood of my family's legacy, the physical manifestation of my grandfather's enduring vision. I imagined Silas Vance, a man I'd only known through faded photographs and my father's stories, standing at the surveyor's table, his gaze as unyielding as granite, his voice resonating with the authority of a man who understood the true meaning of ownership. He hadn't just bought land, he'd claimed it, nurtured it, and imbued it with the promise of a future for his descendants. And that promise, I now understood, was my inheritance, a sacred trust I was bound to uphold. I was on the porch railing, watching dust devils dance across the dry fields, when the black sedan reappeared. My heart leaped into my throat, and Clementine, tethered to the railing, whickered softly, her ears swiveling towards the approaching vehicle. This time, there were 3 men. The 2 surveyors I'd met before, and a third man, older, with a stern face and a crisp, official-looking badge pinned to his dark jacket. He exuded an air of authority that felt colder, more impersonal than the surveyor's professional demeanor. I met them at the foot of the porch steps, my hand instinctively reaching for the worn wood, a grounding anchor. "Mr. Vance," the older man began, his voice carrying the clipped, precise cadence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I am Mr. Abernathy, representing the County Planning Commission. These are the surveyors who were on your property." "I'm aware of who they are," I said, my gaze shifting to the tall surveyor, who offered a tight, almost imperceptible nod. "We've reviewed the documentation you provided," Abernathy continued, his eyes scanning my face with an unreadable expression. "The 1892 land grant. It's most impressive, a remarkable piece of history." He paused, and for a moment, I thought he might concede. But then his gaze hardened, and the mask of professional neutrality slipped, revealing a flicker of something more determined, more inevitable. "However," he said, the word landing like a small, hard stone in my chest, "while the grant confirms your family's ownership of the acreage, it does not, in itself, preclude the possibility of public access rights for riparian areas. Laws have evolved, Mr. Vance. Easements, prescriptive rights, public right-of-ways. These are legal concepts that can, in certain circumstances, supersede original land grants, especially when the land has been historically utilized or is considered vital for public resources." The surveyors stood a step behind him, their expressions impassive, their roles now reduced to mere observers in this escalating negotiation. The tall one's eyes, however, held a flicker of something that looked suspiciously like discomfort. He'd seen the land grant. He knew its weight. "Historically utilized?" I echoed, my voice dangerously quiet. "By whom?" "My family has worked this land for over a century. Willow Creek has always been our water source, our lifeblood. There's no history of public use, no trails, no access points that weren't created by my ancestors for their own use. The county is exploring all legal avenues to ensure public access to waterways," Abernathy stated, his tone unwavering. "Especially those designated as significant riparian corridors. Your property, Mr. Vance, lies directly along such a corridor. The assessment is ongoing." The phrase "ongoing" hung in the air, a promise of continued intrusion. The knot of dread in my stomach tightened, morphing into a cold, hard anger. They were trying to wear me down, to intimidate me with legal jargon and the implied weight of governmental authority. They saw me as a simple farmer, easily dismissed, easily outmaneuvered. But they underestimated the depth of my connection to this land, the generations of grit and determination that flowed through my veins. "Mr. Abernathy," I said, stepping forward, my gaze locked onto his. "My grandfather's land grant is unequivocal. It states absolute ownership. There are no exceptions, no caveats, and the law, as it stands today, recognizes the validity of such documents. I will not allow any part of my farm to be designated for public access. My family has defended this land against blights, droughts, and economic hardship for over a century. We will defend it against this too." I could feel the familiar piece of my domain feel off. It was no longer just my sanctuary. It was a battleground. The air, once thick with the scent of pine and dry earth, now seemed heavy with unspoken threats and the sterile formality of legal proceedings. Abernathy's jaw tightened, the stern lines around his mouth deepening. He hadn't expected such a direct challenge, such unshakable resolve. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sheaf of papers, crisp and white, starkly contrasting with the aged parchment of my grandfather's grant. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice now laced with a subtle but unmistakable warning. "We have initiated the formal process for acquiring an easement. This will involve multiple hearings, public comment periods, and potentially eminent domain proceedings if an agreement cannot be reached voluntarily." Eminent domain. The words were a physical blow, a stark reminder of the power imbalance. The surveys, the jargon, the polite inquiries. It had all been a preamble to this. They were not asking for permission. They were informing me of their intentions. "Then I will be there," I stated, my voice resonating with a conviction that surprised even myself. "At every hearing, I will present my grandfather's land grant at every opportunity. I will fight this with every legal recourse available to me. This farm is not just property. It is my legacy. It is the echo of my grandfather's sweat and toil, the promise of my children's future, and I will not let it be blighted by some arbitrary designation of public access based on a twisted interpretation of laws that seek to diminish the rights of landowners." The tall surveyor shifted his weight, his gaze flicking between Abernathy and me. The younger one looked utterly lost, his brow furrowed in a silent plea for clarity. Abernathy's expression remained cool, but a subtle flicker of doubt had entered his eyes. He had encountered resistance before, but rarely with this level of informed defiance. He clearly had expected a more compliant landowner. "We will be in touch, Mr. Vance," he said, his voice clipped. He turned and walked back towards the sedan, the other two following, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path. As their vehicle pulled away, leaving behind a trail of dust that settled slowly on the parched earth, I stood on the porch, my hand still gripping the railing. The initial surge of adrenaline began to recede, leaving behind a profound weariness, but also a deep, unshakable resolve. They had presented their threat, and I had met it head-on. The land grant, that beautiful archaic document, felt like a shield, a weapon, a tangible piece of my family's history that gave me strength. It was a reminder that my grandfather had anticipated challenges, that he had secured our future with foresight and determination. And now, it was my turn. The fight for my farm, for my legacy, had truly begun. The whispers of public access had been silenced for now, but the echoes of absolute ownership were ringing louder than ever in my mind. I knew this was just the first volley in a longer, more arduous campaign, but for the first time since those surveyors had rolled up my drive, I felt a surge of hope, a potent belief that my grandfather's foresight and my own fierce protection might just be enough to keep my sanctuary intact. The air crackled with an unspoken tension, a palpable friction between the ancient, sun-baked earth and the sterile pronouncements of officialdom. Mr. Abernathy, a man whose face seemed perpetually set in a mask of professional neutrality, adjusted his tie, a gesture that felt as alien to my farm as a foreign blight. His words, delivered with the calm, measured cadence of someone accustomed to bending wills, hung heavy in the dry air. "Mr. Vance," he began, his voice a low murmur that barely disturbed the chirping of the birds. "We understand your attachment to this land. It's a beautiful property. But the county has certain responsibilities. Willow Creek is a designated riparian corridor. Under current state statutes, the public has a right to access such waterways for recreational purposes, regardless of original land grants." My jaw tightened. Recreational purposes. The phrase struck me as absurd, an invasive tendril reaching into the very marrow of my existence. Willow Creek wasn't a playground. It was the lifeblood of my farm, the sustained nourishment for my crops, the cool, clear ribbon of water that had mirrored generations of Vance faces. It was my sanctuary, not a public park. "Mr. Abernathy," I began, my voice tighter than I'd intended, a rasp against the quiet hum of the afternoon. "My grandfather, Silas Vance, purchased this land outright in 1892. The grant is unequivocal. It states absolute ownership, with no provisions for public access, easements, or any other such encumbrances. This creek has been private property for over a century. My family has tended to it, protected it, and relied on it through droughts and floods. It is not now, and never has been, a public thoroughfare." Abernathy offered a sympathetic, yet unconvincing smile. "I've seen the grant, Mr. Vance. It's a remarkable document. But laws evolve. What was paramount in 1892 might be superseded by modern statutes designed for the greater good. We're talking about a potential easement for public access, not confiscation. If we can reach an agreement, it could prevent a more protracted process, perhaps even legal action that would involve eminent domain." Eminent domain. The words landed like a physical blow, a cold dread seeping into my bones. The specter of public access, once a distant annoyance, now loomed as a tangible threat, a legal juggernaut aimed directly at the heart of my inheritance. My grandfather's foresight, his meticulous documentation, felt suddenly fragile against the weight of contemporary legislation. The younger surveyor, a lanky fellow with perpetually furrowed brows, shifted his weight, his gaze flicking between Abernathy and me. He seemed genuinely bewildered, caught in the crossfire of a dispute far beyond his professional purview. The tall surveyor, however, remained impassive, his expression as unyielding as granite, his cataloging complete, his report filed. "An easement for recreational access to a creek that sustains my livelihood?" I repeated, the absurdity of it all washing over me. "That's not a greater good, Mr. Abernathy. That's a recipe for disaster. Imagine the damage, the erosion, the pollution, the sheer disrespect for private property. This is my home. This land has been in my family for generations. My grandfather carved this farm out of the wilderness with his own hands. He secured this land grant to ensure his family's future. It was meant to be absolute. And we respect that legacy, Mr. Vance," Abernathy said, his tone a touch more firm now, the mask of neutrality slipping to reveal a steely core of authority. "But the county also has a mandate to ensure public enjoyment of natural resources. The waterways are particularly sensitive. We've initiated formal proceedings for an easement. We're prepared to negotiate, of course. But rest assured, the county is prepared to pursue this." He produced a sheaf of papers from his briefcase, their crisp edges a stark contrast to the weathered wood of my porch railing. He offered them to me. "This outlines the county's proposed easement, the scope of access, and our initial offer for compensation. I urge you to review it carefully, and perhaps consult with an attorney. We are open to discussions." My hands trembled as I took the papers. The lawyerly jargon, the carefully crafted clauses, felt like an alien language designed to obfuscate and dispossess. I scanned the first page, my eyes catching phrases like riparian rights, public easement, and prescriptive access. The familiar piece of my domain felt off, like an alien intruder had set up camp in my very soul. "I'll review it," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. Inside, however, a slow burn had begun. Anger, at first a smoldering ember, was starting to curdle into a cold, hard resolve. My grandfather's land grant, that ornate, archaic document, was not just a piece of paper. It was a shield, a testament to his foresight. And now, it was my weapon. Abernathy nodded curtly. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Vance. Thank you for your time." The black sedan crunched its way back down the rutted track, the dust rising in its wake like a final, mocking salute. I stood on my porch, the sheaf of papers clutched in my hand, watching until the vehicle disappeared over the rise. Clementine, my prize mare, whickered softly from the pasture, nudging my hand with her warm muzzle. She sensed the shift in me, the hardening of my resolve. The sun was beginning its molten descent, casting long, skeletal shadows across the fields. The whispering wheat, usually a comforting sound, seemed to murmur with a new anxiety. I walked back into the house, the scent of old paper and pipe tobacco, my father's study, a familiar anchor in the rising tide of apprehension. I needed to find that grant, to hold it, to feel its weight, to reaffirm its power. The study was as my father had left it, books piled high, maps unfurled, the air thick with the ghosts of research and contemplation. His old oak filing cabinet, a relic from a bygone era, stood in the corner, its brass handles dulled with age. I knew where he kept the important documents. My heart hammered a staccato rhythm against my ribs as I pulled open the bottom drawer. It creaked in protest, a low groan that echoed the unease in my gut. Beneath a collection of tax records and old deeds, I found it. A thick, leather-bound folder, its surface cracked and worn, bearing the faded imprint of Silas Vance's initials. It was tied with a faded red ribbon, brittle with age. My fingers fumbled as I untied it, the knot resisting for a moment before surrendering. The pages within were yellowed and fragile, the ink a deep, sepia tone. The land grant itself was at the front, its ornate, almost archaic design, a testament to a different time. The gold lettering, though faded, was still legible. "The United States of America, to all to whom these presents shall come. Greetings. Know ye that Silas Vance has purchased of the Register of the Land Office at Sacramento City the tract of land hereinafter described." My eyes traced the elegant, spidery script, the preamble speaking of sovereignty and title. Then I found the crucial declaration, the words that had echoed in my mind since Abernathy's pronouncement. "This grant conveys absolute ownership of the hereinafter described lands without reservation or encumbrance for the sole and exclusive use of the grantee and his heirs in perpetuity." I read it again, and again. The words seemed to leap off the page, resonating with a power I hadn't fully appreciated until this moment. Absolute ownership, without reservation or encumbrance, for the sole and exclusive use. This wasn't just a deed, it was a declaration of independence, a legacy of unshakable dominion. A profound relief, so potent it almost brought me to my knees, surged through me. It was more than just the legal validation. It was the connection to my grandfather, to his vision, to the very foundation of my life. He had anticipated this, perhaps, in his own way. He had built a bulwark against the impersonal forces that might one day seek to encroach upon what he had built. I carefully placed the grant back in its folder, retied the ribbon, and returned it to the filing cabinet. The oppressive weight of dread that had settled upon me earlier had lifted, replaced by a quiet, unshakable determination. Mr. Abernathy and his county might have their statutes, their modern laws, but they did not have the undeniable truth of that 1892 land grant. The following morning, as the sun painted the eastern sky in hues of rose and gold, I sat on my porch, Clementine grazing peacefully nearby. The crisp morning air carried the scent of dew-kissed earth and distant pine. I was waiting, not with apprehension, but with a coiled readiness. The surveyors had promised to be in touch. They would expect me to be cowed, to be intimidated by their legal jargon and implied threats. They expected me to roll over, to accept their imposed greater good. They were wrong. The rumble to a halt of a vehicle down the track was predictable. This time, it wasn't the sleek, dark sedan. It was a sturdy county pickup truck, a more utilitarian vehicle, but no less an emblem of the authority I was now prepared to challenge. Abernathy was there again, and this time he was accompanied by a different man, older, with a stern, weathered face and eyes that seemed to have seen too many battles. This, I surmised, was the county attorney, or perhaps a supervisor directly involved in land disputes. They approached the house, their expressions a mixture of professional courtesy and ingrained expectation. Abernathy held a new sheaf of papers, thicker than the last. "Mr. Vance," Abernathy began, his voice losing some of its earlier smoothness, tinged with a hint of exasperation. "We've reviewed the document you provided." He gestured to the papers in his hand. "While your grandfather's grant is comprehensive, the county's legal department has determined that modern statutes regarding public access to waterways, particularly those designated as critical riparian corridors, can indeed establish easements, even over historically private land. The principle of public right-of-way for navigable or recreational waterways often takes precedence." The younger surveyor was absent, replaced by the stern-faced man who now stepped forward. He introduced himself as Mr. Henderson, the county council. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble. "Mr. Vance, I understand this is your family's land. We respect that. But the county has a duty to the public. Willow Creek, by its nature and its location, falls under provisions that allow for public access. The grant, while impressive, doesn't negate these established legal principles that have been upheld in numerous court cases." I stood up, my own voice steady, resonating with the quiet strength I'd drawn from the dusty pages of the land grant. "Mr. Henderson," I said, meeting his gaze directly, "you speak of modern statutes and court cases. I speak of a document signed by the United States government in 1892, granting my grandfather absolute and unequivocal ownership of this land.